everyone. We appreciate you taking the time out to come and join us today to learn about this very timely issue. My name is Christina Schlitt. I'm president of the Grand Traverse Area League, and I would like to introduce the officers of each league in attendance today. Please stand when I call your name. Nancy Duck, president of the Leelanau County. Julie Tarr, Vice President of Leelanau County and co-host with me today. And Natalie Wood, Secretary Wilson. Sorry. I'd also like to introduce Ingrid Brophy, our treasurer of Grand Traverse area. There she is. And Secretary Karen Baker, who is managing our Zoom today. And Laura Atwell, who is our membership chair. Our advocacy chairs, Jane Packard from Leelanau, is not available today, but maybe she's on Zoom. And Margaret Goman and Peg Townsend are the Grand Traverse area membership chair, advocacy chairs, and I know they're both out of state as well. I'd like to recognize Joan Uno, past national board member and current member of the National Federal Judicial Study Committee. Joan. And thank you for your leadership. We are here in part to celebrate the 105th anniversary of the League of Women Voters. Thank you. Advocacy and education have been the two arms of the League since 1920. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. While some of the federal government's actions are being challenged in courts, our local leagues can do more to understand the nuances of immigration in this country and to recognize and support migrants and their families in our community in a humanitarian way. Yes, we can do something. The basis for our advocacy is we'll be using the LWV US immigration position printed in Impact on Issues 2024-26, pages 167 through 168. And it reads in part as, the League of Women Voters believes that immigration policies should promote reunification of immediate families, meet economic, business, and employment needs of the United States, be responsive to those facing political persecution or humanitarian crisis. Provisions should be made for qualified persons to enter the United States on student visas. All persons should receive fair treatment under the law. The League supports federal immigration law that provides an efficient, expeditious system with minimal or no backlogs for legal entry of immigrants into the United States. In transition to a reformed system, the League supports provisions for individuals already living in the country without legal permission to earn legal status. The League also supports programs allowing foreign workers to enter and leave the United States to meet seasonal or sporadic labor needs. U.S. residents without permission to earn legal status reads, in achieving overall policy goals, the League supports a system for individuals in the country without legal permission to earn legal status, including citizenship by paying taxes, studying civics, and meeting other relevant criteria. While policy reforms, including a path to legal status, remain unachieved, the League does not support deporting these immigrants who have no history of major and/or violent criminal activity. This is part of the national position that the League of Women Voters of the Grand Traverse area and Leelanau County will base recommended actions through their advocacy committees and announce those actions if and when each local league's board support the committee's recommendations. Thank you, and Julie Tarr, Vice President of the Leelanau County League, will introduce our speakers. And thank you for joining.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to introduce the excellent panel today and thank them for taking the time out of what must be a difficult time working in immigration policy and law. Our first speaker will be Marcelo Betti. He's the legal co-director of Immigration Law and Justice Michigan. And he will be followed by Agnes Jury, immigration attorney with Pillar Immigration Services, and then followed by Deb Neddo and Beatriz Moreno. Deb is the coordinator of Migrant English Language Learner and Homeless Student Services, Northwest Education Services, and Beatriz is the parent liaison with the Northwest Education Services. But just so you sort of understand how this is going to work, we're going to ask each speaker to talk for 10 minutes, and we're going to take questions at the end of all the speakers. So please jot down any questions that you may have, and which speaker it is for, if there is one. And those of you who are on Zoom, please type your questions into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that at the end. Let's begin. Marcelo.
Well, glad to be here. The cookies are delightful. I don't know if you prepared them, but thank you. Cookie enthusiast here. Okay, sorry. Oh, that was my testing. I did perfect. All right. So I was invited to speak today about the various immigration policy changes that the current administration has made since taking office about a month ago. It's only been a month. So before I get to the substance of those changes, I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand why it is that the president, or specifically the executive branch, how come that they have such extensive authority to dictate immigration policy? So I have to bring us back to the basics, which is the US Constitution. Okay, and the reason I say that is because there are only two places in the US Constitution that mention immigration. The first one is Article 1, Section 8, which authorizes Congress, not the president, Congress to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. And then the second reference is in the 14th Amendment, the relevant part of which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That's the birthright citizenship clause. That's it. Okay. Now, over the years, Congress has used their constitutional powers to pass laws regarding immigration. And the main law that we've had in effect for about 60 years now is the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Attorneys call it INA for short. And it's really just a patchwork of different bills that have been passed over the last 6 decades. And one of the many things that the INA does is it delegates some of Congress's constitutional authority over immigration to the executive branch. So, for example, Congress has delegated to the executive branch things like the power to determine whether a foreign person is allowed to stay in the United States, the power to grant a foreign person permission to be in the United States, even if they don't qualify for a visa, and also the power to decide whether or not to deport someone. So all of these powers have been delegated to the executive branch. So that's why it feels like immigration laws are changing every time that we have a new president. The law itself is not changing, at least not without congressional approval, but the changes are decisions that the president or the executive branch make on how to enforce the law within the parameters of that authority that was delegated to the executive branch, which is a vast authority, but it does have limits. And we'll get to those in a bit. So when the president took office on January 20th, he wasted no time and he issued a bunch of executive orders related to immigration policy. And no, we're not going to have time to talk about each and every one of them. But the one that caught the most media attention was the executive order that aimed to limit birthright citizenship. And basically that order, I'm going to paraphrase it, but the order said that babies who are born in the United States are not US citizens if their mother is either undocumented or only has temporary legal status, and the father is not a green card holder or a US citizen. Now, let's go back to the Constitution. Okay, so the 14th Amendment clearly states, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. How come the president can determine that something different? Well, the answer so far is he cannot. Okay, so the administration's legal argument is that a mother who is here on temporary status or without status is not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Now, just about anyone with a law degree knows that this executive order is blatantly unconstitutional. Okay, and the reason I say law degree is because most of us are not walking around the street talking about jurisdiction with each other, right? So at least not on a regular basis. But the meaning of that word, it's a big word, but the meaning is relatively simple. Jurisdiction is the power that a court has to make legal decisions over a person or a type of case. Okay, the power that a court has to make legal decisions about a person or a type of case. So if it was true, as the executive order says, that these mothers are not subject to US jurisdiction, then the justice system would also not have the power to decide whether they can be deported or not, which obviously is a power that the US clearly has. So that's why several courts have already ruled this executive order to be unconstitutional. And frankly, I do not expect that to change, even if it gets to the Supreme Court. Now, this executive order does serve a couple of purposes for this administration. The first one is that it's so absurd that it has caused it to have a disproportionate amount of legal attention compared to all of the other things that the administration is doing. You can look at me as living proof of that. I'm here talking to you about it in my limited time instead of all the other stuff. Okay, so even though it's never gone into effect, and it probably never will go into effect. Now, the second thing that it does is it introduces what was previously considered to be an absurd idea into public consciousness, so that maybe someday there will be enough support for a constitutional amendment, which would be the only way to change or to obtain that result. In other words, this order normalizes an idea that goes against the plain language of the Constitution. Okay, so now we know all that. What are the other things that the Trump administration has been doing regarding immigration policy while we were distracted talking about birthright citizenship? So, well, again, too many to discuss, but I'm going to highlight a few that I think are relevant to our region. Okay, so the first change to highlight is actually not an executive order. It is the rescission, the cancellation of an internal policy that protected certain areas like schools, hospitals, churches from immigration enforcement. So now ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the immigration police, you can say, ICE agents have been given discretion, given the power to conduct immigration arrests at houses of worship or in a kindergarten classroom and so on. Now, in response to that, just last week, dozens and dozens of religious groups sued the Trump administration on the grounds that immigration enforcement inside churches during church services where the government doesn't have a valid judicial warrant violates those congregations' freedom of religion under the First Amendment. So we'll see where that goes. I think it's a viable argument. Okay, now, another relevant new policy that the Trump administration has adopted has to do with something called expedited removal, which is basically a fast-track deportation without the right to a hearing. So this new policy, which actually existed during the first Trump administration, it allows individual immigration officers to deport, again, without the right to a hearing, any person that, in that officer's opinion, lacks lawful status and has been in the country for less than 2 years. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't carry my US passport around with me to show that I'm a US citizen. I definitely don't carry documents to show that I've been in the country for the last 2 years. Um, Now, I hate to say this, but I'm not worried about it because of how I look. But civil rights advocates are very worried about the potential, well, an actual increase in racial profiling. That is, people being detained and possibly deported without the right to a hearing because of the color of their skin or the language that they speak. And remember, you can be a U.S. citizen and not know how to speak English. Okay, a couple of weeks ago, a Puerto Rican family, including a toddler, were taken into ICE custody in Milwaukee after they were overheard speaking Spanish. Okay, and then this family, all of whom are US citizens, they were transported to a detention center before immigration officials realized their mistake, and then they issued an apology. So this is happening, okay? And then one last change that I want to highlight before we move on to our other panelists, and again, to focus on our region specifically, there's a new Department of Homeland Security memorandum that directs immigration officers to consider terminating status and applying expedited removal, which now you know what that is, to immigrants who were lawfully paroled into the country. Now, when we hear the word parole outside of the context of immigration, many of us think of someone who is accused of a crime, but they're allowed to stay out of detention for one reason or another. Okay, but in immigration land, there's something else that's called humanitarian parole. And that is, again, one of the powers that Congress delegated to the president, which was the power to permit a person to be in the United States, even if that person does not have a visa. So the Biden administration used this authority in a variety of ways, the least controversial of which is relevant to our region, which was the Uniting for Ukraine program, which was a program created in April 2022, shortly after the war began. And it allowed US-based individuals to sponsor Ukrainians who were displaced by the war to come to the US temporarily under humanitarian parole status. And many Ukrainians came here to Northern Michigan. Our office here in Traverse City has helped well over 200 clients here in our region. And unfortunately, virtually all of them are right now in an extremely vulnerable situation because this administration has authorized, again, individual immigration officers to terminate their humanitarian parole status at their discretion, okay? And again, these are people who fled the war in Ukraine and who the government authorized to come to the country. And we also have clients similarly situated in places like Haiti or Venezuela who enter the country lawfully under similar programs. They have jobs in our communities, they have children in the schools, and now all of them are basically vulnerable to deportation. Anyways, I have a couple more things to share, but let's move on. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so let's move on to our next panelists. Thank you.
So my name is Agnes Jury. Do I get my PowerPoint projected? I don't have it. All right. So we can go to the next slide. So I was asked to talk about, I thought my audience was going to be, people who are here without lawful status. It doesn't, just like judging by my audience here today, I don't think you are, but I'm sure you meet a lot of people like that, or you have contact with them in your volunteer positions that you can relay this information. So my topic is what are the rights of people who are stopped by ICE or encounter an ICE agent. So the three basic principles are that ICE officers cannot demand identification without reasonable suspicion that a person is unlawfully present in the USA. So they probably stop somebody, like Marcelo said, based, their profile based on their appearance. They can come up and ask for your identification. And here is where a US citizen might get swept up in these kind of enforcement actions, because if you refuse to provide documentation of who you are, they, may say, well, you look like the person that we are searching for, who's a criminal, et cetera, et cetera. They have reasonable suspicion. If you don't produce an ID to show them otherwise, you might get swept up. But you have the right, or they have the right, to refuse to show their ID, and ICE cannot demand them to show it. The second one is that ICE cannot arrest someone solely for refusing. Previous slide, sorry. And the second point, ICE cannot refuse or arrest someone for solely refusing to answer questions or provide an ID. So if you don't want to show them ID, you don't want to answer questions about who you are, they cannot just arrest you based on that. And they cannot arrest you without probable cause. Probable cause is reasonable belief based on their evidence that a person is undocumented. And again, what is that reasonable evidence? Well, if you look a lot like somebody that they have a record of, that tells them that this is a some kind of person who committed a crime, either or some other violation of immigration law or criminal law, that can be probable cause. All right, now we can go to the second slide, please. So bearing those things in mind, the first thing that an undocumented person should remember is that they have the right to remain silent. If they choose to remain silent, ironically, they should say so. But they should say it out loud. The ICE officers, I feel for ICE officers too, because they never know who they're approaching, just like our police officers or sheriff deputies. You never know who you're encountering. If this is a serious criminal who may carry a weapon, your life may be at jeopardy. So they approach everybody with that in mind, with their safety in mind. So standing completely silent seems a little more oppositional or frightening to an ICE officer than simply saying, I choose my right to remain silent, in a calm and polite way. You may show the confronted person, undocumented person, may show a know your rights card. This lets the officer know that this is a person who's aware of their rights. It's not that they're just bluntly refusing, based on the mere encounter of an ICE officer. This is somebody that's educated on their rights, and they show that they do know that. So next one is that if you are asked where you were born and how you entered the United States, again, you can refuse to answer. Just like if anybody, any citizen or permanent resident or anybody is arrested and you're informed of your right to remain silent, the general advice is don't answer questions. There is nothing you can say that isn't going to be used against you, and there's nothing you can say that's going to be helpful. Same kind of thought applies here. If you start talking about where you're from and when you entered and how long you've been here, you're probably just digging yourself a hole. Again, they can refuse to show their identity to show what documents they're from. And again, this is where I actually took a picture of my naturalization certificate just recently, just so I can, if I'm accosted, I could show somebody, yeah, look, here's my certificate of citizenship, because I don't want to be swept up into a deportation facility. So and permanent residents are required to carry their green cards. So if a permanent resident is stopped and asked to produce documents, they should, right? And they have every reason to do so, because they're here lawfully. They shouldn't be confronted by an ICE officer, and they would want to end that encounter as quickly as possible. And Marcelo's right. What does everybody else do? I think the only piece of ID you can show other than your passport to prove that you're a citizenship now is the enhanced driver's license. So that will, because only citizens can get an enhanced driver's license. That's another proof that a citizen can show, okay, don't take me, I'm a citizen. But they can, an undocumented person can refuse to show their identity documents. And then don't take action that makes a statement that can be used against you as well. This applies more in a work setting where oftentimes ICE will put people in groups just to sort people out, because they will conduct raids at places like a large factory where they suspect or have knowledge of the employer hiring large amounts of undocumented immigrants. And so they'll go in there and they'll separate people. And if an ICE agent announces, anybody who doesn't have a work visa, stand to the left, a non-documented person doesn't have to take that action. They don't have to go over to stand in that group, not move, or they can go in an area that's not designated for any of those categories. Because just by taking that action, they're basically, it's the equivalent of saying, I'm undocumented. Well, and the most important part too is don't show any false documents. Showing false documents in and of itself is a violation of immigration law, because you're trying to gain an immigration benefit, which is not being deported or staying here. So it in and of itself is a crime, immigration law violation. So don't show any false documents and do not lie. Lying to an immigration official is also against immigration law. So both those things, even if you're, they cannot prove that you're undocumented if you lie, or it can come back and bite you in the butt. Let's just, next slide, please. All right, so there, Marcelo touched on the fact that, there used to be places that were sanctuaries, like churches and schools and hospitals, and no longer applies. There's different treatment of the different locations where ICE can enter or encounter an undocumented person. And so we'll talk about what if ICE comes to an undocumented person's home. Well, the first thing is they don't have to open the door. In order for an ICE officer to enter your home, they have to have a valid search warrant. And it can be one that is issued by a federal judge or a state judge. It has to have your correct name, address, and it has to be signed by a judge. So the first thing that an undocumented person wants to do is to ask to see that warrant. It can be slid under the door. It can be put up against the window. Heck, text it if you need to. But take a careful look. They have to take a careful look at the warrant, because, and my son actually just experienced this in the Career Tech Center. He's in public safety, and they had an exercise where they had to draft a warrant in a class exercise, and the kids went back and had to redraft it like 10 times, because each time they got something wrong. They got either the name wrong, or the location wrong, or what they were looking for didn't apply, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same thing with officers. They you can't just assume that the document that you're being given is completely correct, that it pertains to this address, this person, and that it's signed by a judge. So first thing to do is check the warrant. If the person decides not to speak with the officers, they don't have to open the door, or if they decide to speak with the officers, they do not have to open the door to do so. They, can speak through the door, they can step out and close the door behind them, but they do not have to let the officers in if the search warrant is not valid, or if there is no search warrant at all. And again, this is kind of like, if I'm a permanent resident and they come to my door falsely, I don't want to let them in. If they don't show me a valid search warrant, I don't want to let them in, but I may want to talk to them to show them my permanent resident card. So I would step out and talk. And then I just wanted to point out that there's a difference between an ICE deportation warrant and a search warrant. If the only document that they have is a deportation warrant, they cannot legally come into your house. So the next slide shows kind of the difference between the two types of warrants. So a deportation warrant is issued by ICE or Department of Homeland Security. It's signed by an ICE officer, not a judge. It does not allow entry into your home, but it does allow you, for the arrest. So a search warrant that is issued by either a federal judge or a state judge is signed by a judge. It does allow entry into a warrant or a home, and it can also allow the arrest. So the next slide shows you what I believe a state warrant, a search warrant looks like. So this is just a template of a search warrant that's provided by the state court administrative offices. Sometimes it will have the court that issues it in the heading, and you can see that it has a judge's signature at the bottom. The very next slide shows a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, warrant for arrest. And I borrowed this off the internet, by the way, in case they're called trademarked or something. Yeah, so this is somebody else's sample of a U.S. Department of Homeland Security arrest warrant. And so you can see the title's different. The signature is of an ICE agent. So clearly, if you know what you're looking for, you can distinguish between the two. Next slide. So the next step, location is that a non-documented person could be confronted with ICE either at work or in public. And the key, I guess, is not to panic or run away, because that's, again, one of those actions that kind of gives you away, right? If you're stopped by a police officer and you start running, what do they assume? You got a reason to run, right? The undocumented person can calmly walk towards the exit. If the ICE agents, hey, you stop, they can ask, am I free to leave? That puts the agent in an awkward position of having to explain, well, no, we've got information that you're undocumented, or we've got a picture of somebody who resembles you or we have reason to believe that you are undocumented based on you working here, wherever, depending on where that person is stopped. At that point, if the officer says, no, you may not leave, they can choose to remain silent. They can also refuse a search. If if you're confronted in public, the officers can conduct a pat down if they think that the person stopped is either undocumented or, they can do it if they have suspicion that the person is armed or dangerous, or has violated immigration law or criminal law. So one good thing to say is right away, if an officer tries to do a pat down, is to say, I'm not armed and I'm not dangerous, not violating any criminal law or immigration law, and I do not consent to the search. And if possible, record it. Nowadays, just like people start recording police officers during a traffic stop, you can record an ICE agent in a public space, and in the conduct of their activities, official activities. So if the undocumented person is with family, maybe they can step aside and film the encounter. If the undocumented person is filming, they can, but they shouldn't interfere with ICE agents' activities. Right, so you can't be like in their face and trying to tackle, away from them while filming. And then the last one is you have the right to speak to a lawyer. So the next slide goes into the right to a lawyer. So if you are detained or taken into custody, well, actually, before that happens, an undocumented person should speak to an attorney ahead of time to know, what the current environment, immigration and political environment is, whether they are at risk of being deported. I did not know about some of the executive actions that Marcelo pointed out myself. So it's always a good idea for somebody who may have reason to, fear immigration action and to speak to an attorney and potentially engage that attorney. Just put down a deposit that if I need your services, I've got a form that says you're my attorney, so that if I am detained or taken into custody, I can show that form and say, I have an attorney, I want to talk to my attorney. If somebody doesn't do that, they do still have a right to talk to a lawyer, even by phone. And if they don't know who to call, they can ask for a list of attorneys, either pro bono attorneys or paid attorneys. And if the detention center says we don't have such a list, they can also ask to contact the consulate, and the consulate can help them find an attorney, either pro bono or paid. Most importantly, they can refuse to sign any and all paperwork until they have had the opportunity to speak with an attorney. And it's very important that if they choose to sign something, that they really understand what they're signing. And to be honest, it is, like Marcelo pointed out, parole in plain language is one thing, or, to us in criminal setting is one thing, and parole and immigration is another thing. And there are other terms and references in immigration law that are, may have a plain meaning, but they don't. They have a totally different meaning in immigration law. So it's very important that even if they can read English and understand English, that somebody has explained the meaning of the words and terms that they are reading in immigration context. So that's it. If you have any questions, we'll talk about them at the end. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deb, and
Hola, I'm Beatriz. Everybody knows me as B.
so we were asked to each do 10 minutes, but we come as a unit, so here we are. And when B and I met to talk about what we were, to put this presentation together, this was the title that she instantly came up with, and it's so fitting, and it's really very heartbreaking, but it's the truth. As both speakers have already said today, our landscape is changing, and it's changing very fast. So we're trying to keep up with the changes and help families feel safe here. Next slide, please. So welcome, everybody. And this is B's amazing mother, by the way. I just love this picture, and it makes it very real. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the history of the migrant program, a few statistics, the current state, school policy, and then B's going to dive into supporting students and family and furthering students' education and family education. Next slide. So we are funded, the migrant program is federally funded. So we're currently existing, and we've been in existence since 1966 under President Johnson. B found that statistic and knew it, and I thought, well, that's really interesting because I didn't know that. So my mama started with the first programs in Elk Rapids in 1966, a long, long time ago. And one of us has been a part of the program ever since, and he is the same. And we're here to meet the specific needs of migrant children and their families. Next slide. Our purpose, developed in 1966, and it really doesn't waver much, is that we are to reduce the unique challenges of migratory children and their family. And those challenges that we work a lot with are their high level of mobility, which affects a lot of school and service access, cultural and language barriers, which you can imagine, right? Social and community isolation. So if you think about traveling sometimes multiple times a year, what that social isolation may look like. So we work a lot with that to help build community among our families and help them feel welcome. And there's a lot of health related problems that with insurance or with access, they may or may not be able to get help with. So we help access services. And then also we help with the disadvantaged. So again, that goes back to connecting services and helping students get into school as soon as they can.
And also like, oh, sorry, for the last one, a lot of us who work for the migrant program have been involved in the migrant program. We were part of the migrant program when we moved here as children. So we have that connection and we understand the lifestyle of being a migrant. So I think it helps a lot of our families to feel a little bit more connected and understood.
Absolutely. And so we have to talk about the changing landscape. We've changed a lot over the years. A lot of it's through technology. That's when our first migrant population really started to change. When I remember when cherry shakers really started to become popular. That aged myself a lot, but and and we had less and less migrant families, and then it seemed like we picked up again, and we had a lot more wineries and a different variety of jobs, and the immigration is ever changing. And Marcelo definitely said it the best with each change in president. And still, when we think about, we have to have migrant labor. So we are still the nation's #1 producer in 18 commodities, which require hand labor. We're dependent on food and agriculture. It's our state's second largest industry. Incredible. And there are 18 counties in Michigan with over 1,000 farm workers and family members each. So I thought that was important to ground us of why we're here and what our purpose is, and continuing our mission of helping. Next slide, please. And you have to have a Cesar Chavez quote. You want to go ahead and read it?
We need to help students and parents cherish and preserve the ethnic and cultural diversity that nourishes and strengthens this community and this nation. Sí se puede.
And I think this is especially important right now as we're hearing so many things that are going against the preserving the ethnic and cultural diversity, that we think about these words as we move forward with our mission. Next slide. So safety is our first priority. You may think it's education, but you can't come to a school to learn if you are not safe. So really through education and planning, we're focusing on families, schools, and communities. So not only are we educating families and children, we're helping a lot more these days with the schools and the safety, and a lot more education like we're here in the community today, because there are so many people that can support. And then the planning that goes into helping the families, and also all of the plans that we're helping the schools develop to keep safe, and also the communities, so that everybody, I think the spread of fear is just incredible right now. And the more solid information we have and the more faces we can attach to those folks that we can go to for assistance, better off we all are. And next slide, please. So these slides are a little wordy, and I apologize, but our attorney looked at these before we put out, our organization put out a communication to the organization about what rights students have. So our attorney looked at it and he made some changes. So I didn't want to mess with the wording. And I wanted you to be able to see and to read it. So I'll just briefly say that under Plyler versus Doe, and I mean, this is currently, I haven't looked at the news today, but under Plyler versus Doe, the right to equal access to a free public education. So all children in Michigan, regardless of immigration status, which we do not collect, are entitled to a free public education. So we don't ask, we don't know, there shouldn't be any questions. We don't ask for social security numbers. We'll go into this a little bit more, but that's their first basic right. It's Plyler versus Doe. And then the second one, next slide, please, is the Elliott Larson civil rights case, the right to be free from discrimination. So if we think about that, in Michigan, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race or national origin and guarantees the right to access to public accommodations and services, including public education. Our students that are here, they're Michigan residents. They have the right to be in school and to be treated fairly when they are. Next slide. And the third protection is the right to privacy, FERPA. Even though both speakers have already talked about that schools are no longer a sanctuary place, we still have FERPA behind us, and this is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act from 1974. And so we can't just disclose any information without permission. And this includes law enforcement or immigration officials. So we also have to have the court order. So seeing those examples was very helpful for me, because we've seen a lot of, we've been told we need to look at the warrants if an ICE officer enters, but I hadn't seen the difference in the warrant. So that was very helpful. So those are the three bases that our children are here and there to be educated, and they're entitled to that. Next slide, please. So as Marcelo said, and this just struck me as, with all of the panic out there, our work is being changed, and it's now we're having to focus on other things. So we are really focusing now that ICE can enter a building. We're really focusing on educating families and educating the schools and the community on these guidelines. And these guidelines, again, I'm sorry, they're wordy. I don't usually put everything in a slide, but I didn't want to change the legal wording, how the attorney worked it. So you can read that, but to highlight, and this in every presentation that we have gone to, this is the big highlight. When a family comes in to register, there is no reason to ever ask citizenship status. I think that really maybe has been a myth in the past. I remember when my kids were in school, they asked for my children's social security number. And I said, no, you don't need that to enroll my child. So we need residency to prove where they live and that they're a Michigan resident and they're within our school boundaries, or we need a school choice form. So we need to collect residency. We don't need to know anything about the citizenship. If a family happens to state that, don't record it. Don't write it down anywhere. Maybe you quietly let someone know, or maybe be standing in the office because she's already helping them and she knows to get out the red cards that she'll talk about in a few minutes. And then the warrants have already been covered. So now a law enforcement or immigration officer can enter the building like any other public visitor, but they can only get as far as a public area, just like any visitor coming into the school. They don't have access to the building. And as soon as that person comes in and states who they are, you can tell. Most schools now, almost all of them in our area, you have to be buzzed in anyway. Most of them have a secure entrance area, but not all of them yet. But you have to be buzzed in, so you'll know as soon as you see them standing outside by their uniform. And contact administration immediately. And the administration is the person that needs to determine if the officer has the proper paperwork to give them the right to enter a non-public area or to view records. Yes, please.
And also, because I work at a school and I communicate with other schools nearby, everybody has met, like, superintendents have met, principals meet, admin have their little meetings, and they have met with staff so that everybody's on the same page as to if somebody was to come, what are we going to do? Because I know parents were concerned about it, but there is a plan in place for each school.
Next slide, please. And the next two guidelines are, we as a staff have to comply. I mean, we don't in any way want to act as if, and that goes back to what both of you said for the parents, is we all are complying. And if they have a warrant that has been verified, we also have the right to remain silent. And please document the encounter. So write down, I don't know about the filming, I was going to ask that about, but anyway, write down the encounter of, you know, who it was, take down the person's name so that you have a record of that. Next slide. So that's, and as Bea said, we've taken all of those guidelines and we've really made sure that all of the schools in our area and the schools have been really receptive and are reaching out and asking and ensuring that they have the updated information to support families. So the schools have plans in place and they are talking about it. Take it away.
And we did just recently have an event where we're not posting anything, we're not making anything public, everything is, you know, just who needs to know will know. And we did have some volunteers in the community who came out who were notaries. And we did have that form, which I forget what it's called. Yes, so the power of attorney to care for your child in case you were to be detained, who is to take care of your child. So we did have parents come out. We told them what documents they needed to bring. We made copies of them. We had this folder. We put everything in place for them. We told them, you know, now you go home and of course you have the difficult conversation with your children as to if something is to happen to me. This is the folder. This is where you find it. And this is the person who will take care of you. So we're trying to help families with this. We're grateful to the notaries who have stepped up to volunteer their time. We have social gatherings, as you see, to try to also, we want to embrace them for them to be excited and happy to share their culture, their language, you know, the food. But now we know we have to do things a little bit differently because we can't just publicly be out in places without the fear that something may happen. And of course, not everybody who comes to these events are undocumented, but you know, the fear that something may happen or just be targeted. So we're still wanting to do events, but it's just going to look different the way we do things from now on. The continuation of education, we have a lot of first generation kiddos who are graduating. Last year, we had a really nice amount of kids who graduated, and we're wanting to encourage them to continue with their education, and parents want them to go to college. So we're helping them, you know, with FAFSA and understanding how to do that, college tours. There's a lot of things that we still want to do with our kiddos, and sometimes parents can't go to certain things because, you know, the fear. So then we step up a lot of the recruiters or any advocates that are in the community that can help us to support them. This is what we do for the kids to just make sure that they're getting the needs that they deserve. And then we also will do referrals for counseling. There's somebody in the community who is bilingual. And so she has been a great asset to help out with giving counseling individually or with the family. And there has been some DEI funding that has been given to her as well to help out with those that can't pay. Also referrals for legal support. So it's just been really nice that we're able to really lean on each other in times like, especially like right now. Next slide. We're making it, we've always been in the schools. A lot of our teachers, our migrant teachers are in a lot of, how many schools are we in? About 15, 16 schools, we have migrant staff. And so that means we have migrant students in all these different locations. And then we have the recruiters or the liaisons who go in there. And we're just trying to make sure that staff understand the needs of our migrant students. A lot of times when our migrant students are coming in, it's very different, you know, because they're not coming with all their paperwork as to, yeah, here I have like, you know, this is the last scope was that, or my report card. So this is where Deb steps in a lot of times to help us to kind of just get the process going a little bit faster so they can get into the school. Making sure that the staff knows us and recognizes us, like especially the front office lady, that when we're there, they know who we are and what we're there for. Also, the outreach, we have 3 great ladies. I'm including myself in there. But we have Lupita and Paula, and we're the 3 liaisons. Brittany helps us out as well in the summertime more, but we are like all over the place. Like our phone does not stop. It's 24/7. It's gotten better, but we're just, we have to be available for when our families need us. And a lot of times if our families are all working, they're getting home around 6, then they have to shower and feed their kids. And so by the time we're out there into their homes, it's like 8, 9. So, I mean, we're all over the place at all different hours, but whatever it is that works for them. As we know, a lot of our migrant families are here for a short time. So we need to make sure that we're giving them the needs that will help them so they're not as stressed and can do their job while they're here. We want to be very transparent with the community and staff, because we do know that our families are scared. It's real what's happening, and a lot of them are living it firsthand. And so we just want to make sure that nobody feels that they're not being supported. We did have a case here in our community. I won't say what school district, but one of the families did pull out their child, and it would have been their first child going to school. But the fear was great that, somebody would be going into the school and taking their child. So they did stop sending their child to school. But with the work of our liaisons, teachers, just the communication, they are sending the child back, and hopefully things continue.
She starts back on Monday.
So send good vibes. Next slide.
Oh, can I say one more thing about, it can go right here with the slide with the valuing education, but in part of our family support, and when we do the events for the families and really help them with their rights and their folders, we make sure that the school has updated contact information. The family's contact information is, but they really need to have 2 emergency numbers on file that are current, and those are people that they can rely on. So we really worked on that, and that also helps calm some of the fear, so the families know that they have their packet and they feel like they have a plan.
And then value in education. Like my personal story, my dad never went to school, so he didn't know how to read or write. My mom, 6th grade education. All of us, we moved up here in the early 90s. We all graduated from Leelanau School. And so, we know the struggle. We know how it is to move 1,000 times. And so it's really important to focus on school. And a lot of our parents, even though they didn't graduate or didn't go to school, they really want their kids to finish school. So we really help and support as much as we can. So we put that focus, obviously, on education. And if they can't continue with going to high school because of work or whatever life has thrown at them, we do support them to get their GED. And this one is Kelly, and she got her GED last year. The high school graduates of 2024 in our consortium, we had 100% rate of graduates. So we had a nice amount of graduates. We did a celebration for them last year. It was really nice. It came out in the Glen Arbor Sun, the article last summer, if you haven't read it. And now, college readiness, we do have some kids that did get the NMC scholarship. So we have some of our migrant kiddos who are at NMC. And so that's great. One is going for social work and the other one in engineering. So that is great to keep seeing their growth. And now we have this migrant club, which is called the Migrant Youth Empowerment Club. And we are now working on doing college tours with them. MSU has a program that supports a lot of our migrant kiddos. So a lot of them tend to go that way. So we also want to be able to expose them to other colleges in the area. And again, just, we're so proud and want to continue celebrating our future graduates. Next slide. Gracias.
We're going to take questions. Observers or our communities, ever those who maybe are or feel less empowered. It's more to observe and document. Are you still recommending the Mobile Justice Michigan app from the ACLU?
Generally, if the ACLU still recommends it, I would go with that. I'm personally not familiar with the app, but they are one of the better players, and they're usually very reliable sources. So if they say on their websites that it's still up and running, I would say yes, by all means.
So I can repeat the question for those who couldn't hear. As league members, we know that we are charged with being observers, the eyes and ears for those who may perceive to or actually be less empowered. And I've been through a training from the ACLU, which uses a Mobile Justice Michigan app you can download to your phone, and it has a record button, and you can record, do not interfere if you see something happening. But if you hit the record button, even if your device is taken or damaged, it automatically directly uploads the recording to the ACLU to protect. They probably need to make updates. It's still.
We still have cameras in the
Use your phone. And follow the ACLU for updates on adaptations to that power tool. Don't hesitate to be an observer yourself. Know your power and extend it to others. Sarah.
I was wondering if someone could talk about the effect of the link environment and immigrants' access to repeat that.
No,
I mean, that's what the.
Yeah, I couldn't hear it.
The question was about the effects of the Weekend Friday Act that recently was passed in Congress. So that was an actual change in the law. I can't tell you the specific language around AI can tell us. So it's signed into law about 10 days into the Trump presidency. And basically it calls for mandatory detention of any undocumented person for various crimes if they're arrested, so not convicted yet. So if they're arrested, crimes such as burglary, theft, shoplifting, etc., etc. So I think that again, in most contexts, if somebody is, caught shoplifting, generally, I know people who are not even, they don't even have to go to jail. They're, scheduled for an arraignment at a later time. But under this act, if the person is deemed to be undocumented, then the detention is mandatory, and they're going to remain detained all the way through that process, probably with the intent of them eventually being deported. So there are other additional pieces of the act, but that's really the one that's going to affect people the most. It's just a mandatory detention for relatively minor crimes. Oh, so that's going to be the traveling mic.
Okay. Well, let me ask a question from the chat. Marcelo, would you clarify exactly who has discretion to determine expedited removal, specifically in this area? Sheriffs, local law enforcement, etc.
That's a great question. So the expedited removal, you have to be an immigration officer. So it would have to be someone from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I believe Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they would also have that authority. but your local constitutional sheriff does not have that authority to make that determination. It has to be someone who is working in the department.
Teacher Marcelo, I probably don't need this, but Marcelo, where does one get a know your rights card?
Oh, that's a great question. There are immigration organizations. I think the easiest one to get to would be if you go to the Merck website, Migrant, Michigan Immigration Rights Center. Yeah, they have a template where people can download, print them out. You can also order them, a boatload of them. I know our office has recently done that. So if there's what I would Google, to find it, I would just Google red card, immigration red card. Yeah, there you go. There's an example over there. Yeah. So that's what we use for short. Is like make sure you have your red card on you. And again, you can download and print the templates or order them through the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center.
And another question from the chat, how can we support vulnerable populations without drawing attention to their situation, in particular the Ukrainian program, if it's terminated here, while hundreds of people living here, what can we do? If anyone experience?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hard question, right? If the executive branch decides to terminate certain benefits, you're really kind of left at calling your representatives and asking them, hey, I don't agree with that. Can we somehow pass some sort of legislative fix for this? Now, the problem, as we know, is that anything that Congress wants to pass into law is going to have to be signed by the president. So, so that part is difficult, and we would never, I think, no immigration attorney or attorney in general would ever advocate for, people harboring individuals, like, hey, come to my house so you can hide out, like that kind of stuff can lead to criminal liability. So, so ideally, we could have just, call your representatives type advocacy before we get, before these rights are terminated. So right now, for example, Ukrainians still have the right to apply for an additional 18 months of temporary protected status. So it might be worth calling your representative and saying, I agree with that, and I would like that to continue because there's clearly a war still going on, and even if the war stops, there's still entire regions of Ukraine that are under Russian control, and there are homes that are destroyed and yet to be rebuilt. So I think that the time to speak up will be now and not after that, because we're already at that moment of crisis.
Susan.
Just to add, one other thing that I think we can all do is to go to our representative or senator's offices, or and I guess the representatives that are now on recess or whatever, and some folks are showing up at their town hall meetings, and so there are ways, like the first Trump administration, I remember they had like cardboard cutouts of the representatives who didn't show up, and people really let them have it. So there are those kinds of things that would probably grab some attention of the populace too. So.
Jackie and then Joe.
I have two questions. One was for Agnes, and it was about contacting the consulate, and I didn't understand what consulate.
The person's country of origin consulate. So I was born and raised in Poland. I could contact the Polish consulate in Chicago, or I should be allowed to contact the Polish consulate in Chicago. I'm not being detained. I'm not being given any information about lawyers, and I want to speak to a lawyer. Do you have a phone number of a lawyer that I can contact?
Okay. And then my second question is, how are the four of you where does your finances, your job, who pays, and are the cuts going to affect you?
B and I both have a bunch of different funds that we rely on. So if federal funds get cut, then we'll start looking for other funding sources. So we've already had a lot of conversation of if the migrant grant goes away, where do we go? How do we go from there? Conversation isn't the work is going to stop. The conversation is how do we continue?
Joan, and then I'll take this.
I'm a private attorney, so if federal or state funding.
And I'm with a nonprofit organization, Traditional Law Justice Michigan, and we actually don't have that much federal funding. We have a couple of our programs, so yes, we're facing a bit of a shortage right now, but the vast majority of our funding is private donations and some state funding, in the states that support it, what we're doing.
So I'm just going to jump in with the follow-up to that question. One of the recommendations, Agnes, that you made was that migrants should get an attorney in advance. I mean, is that really happening? I mean, are you letting people know who the attorneys are?
Yeah, absolutely. When engages an attorney, the attorney can fill out a form that lets immigration know that this is your attorney. They represent this person. So typically an attorney will take a deposit of, some more, but it shouldn't be a significant amount to be on a retainer. So that if they get a phone call, they can talk to their client and go to the deportation or detention center where that may be, and start advocating for the client's rights. And the amount of payment to the attorney depends on what the purpose of engaging the attorney is, how many steps you want to take after you contact them. But it's definitely worth doing because the attorney will educate you about the process, about what detention center you might be taken to. There are several detention centers. Just knowing where those detention centers are is helpful for the families. It's helpful for you to understand the process, or for the immigrant to understand the process. So a lot of good information can come from consulting with an attorney before anything happens and engaging, putting down a deposit and having them on retainer in case something happens. And then if I can just add to the question about Bilingual Ukraine, there are other options in terms of changing their status. So here on Before You, they could potentially change their status to a student. They could extend their stay here legally. With employment base, there are several categories. They're not easy, but they're there. And if their education fits the visa, they could apply for an employment-based one. Asylum is another one. We're still going on, so it's an option. So there are other categories of visas that statuses that we would change to. So a consultation with immigration friendly. I may be a little technical kind of question, but I'm thinking is like in the summer, especially as I drive down the roads and see the workers in the orchards. And, it's hot and sweaty, and how are they supposed to keep their green cards with them all the time? Can they leave them in their trucks or something like that? How on earth do they do that? By the way, I just saw some people this week working in the vineyards, morning. I think they're doing frozen wine or something. And I can see that they have jackets and everything. But that just seems like
Bring it back.
It seems like every morning something happens. I heard this morning that unaccompanied children, they're taking away funding to hire lawyers for them.
who wants to address that, and is there some place we can send them? And obviously, the federal government's not gonna do it. It's gonna happen. So a 5-month-old child.
Yeah, there were several programs funded by federal grant where organizations would have attorneys available in immigration court to provide guidance for anyone going to court, and then also some representation for children. All of those programs are subject to the stop work order. This actually happened pretty early on to the administration. Those funds are just frozen, and people just received an order to just stop doing that work. So unlike Deb and Bea, they actually don't have the option to continue doing that. The immigration, I know from the folks at Merck who were doing that work, they were allowed to use a specific room in the immigration court area, and they're no longer even allowed to use that room for to educate people who are going to immigration court. They're just being shut out.
My advice is advocates would be to contact ALA, American Immigration Lawyers Association, to see if there's anything that they can do in conjunction with local bar associations to perhaps, provide funding to attorneys directly to step in where other organizations used to. But it will definitely take, people advocating and making an effort to provide those services.
Let me add just one more thing, because I think it's important for people to know right lawyer, okay, not at your expense. In the immigration context, that does not exist because immigration proceedings are not criminal proceedings. Okay, so yes, everyone who is placed in deportation proceedings has the right to a lawyer, but they have to find that lawyer themselves. The government does not have an obligation to beyond telling them, here's a list of lawyers you can contact, but the government does not have an obligation to pay for those lawyers or go find them and bring them to court.
Yes. Thank you for your comments about privacy, and especially in schools. And it occurred to me as I was listening to you speak that many of us do go to registration for high school students in schools, in classrooms. And I'm going to suggest that as certainly a core function of the league, and we want to continue to register high school students. But I think perhaps we want to rethink doing that in classrooms. We might want to rethink how we do that. Because I know I've been in classrooms myself where we say, when someone says, okay, now you can register, but you have to be a citizen to register. And that immediately brings into focus the students who are not. And I think we don't want to do that in these times. Let us perhaps think about offering some guidance to our leaguers, our voter registration effort. Thank you. So the federal funding for attorneys representing, migrants, immigrants, anyone in the immigration court, and the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center that we talked about, their funding's been cut. However, they're asking for donations. And I contributed. I don't have much, but I contributed. So go to their website, and they need to live to keep some of the work going, but they don't have money from the feds, so they need private funds. Mark is a fantastic organization. They do a lot of educating, so it's a really good organization to support.
Yes, Terry.
Yeah, I want to thank you too, Marcelo and Agnes. We have a lot of talent in this room and a lot of talent that people know. What are your needs for language interpreters?
Well, we have Spanish speakers in our staff, so we have that covered. I speak Portuguese as well. We don't have a French interpreter on staff, so been one of my projects to develop a running list of people that we could contact. We have clients from Haiti, for example, who need assistance, and we rely on interpreters for that. So, that would be one language. And yeah, it's been my dream to hire someone who speaks Ukrainian. Should we ever have the money to do that, that would be nice. But those are probably the two biggest ones in our region.
So I just have a couple more questions from the chat. How long can a person be held in a detention center before their case is resolved and the person have visitors?
All right. There's a whole complicated body a lot about this. I don't know if this question is asking about people who are in immigration detention or if it's asking about ICE detainers. So maybe I'll address both. Because one thing that comes up often is folks who are being detained by local law enforcement. In some occasions, ICE, immigration police will send a request, an ICE detainer request to local law enforcement and say, even if that person is free to go, can you please hold them there for up to 48 hours so we can come pick them up and take them to immigration detention? Okay. Now this is controversial because if you're free to go, you should be free to go. But the reality is that most law enforcement agencies honor those detainers. So that's a situation where, even if the person is trying to, get bailed out or even, finish serving, their time in jail, the ICE might ask them to stay, and then that would be a maximum of 48 hours. Now, once you're in immigration detention, all bets are off. I mean, people are being sent to Guantanamo Bay, so theoretically, you should, right to file a motion to leave on bond, but if they're deemed to be a danger to the community, they might remain detained for the entirety and while their removal case is pending, which could drag.
Hi, I have two questions. I don't know who, just jump in. First, is Plyler versus Doe a state case or a federal case?
I never heard that. That's education law, guys. I never do that.
And it's not state, it happened in Texas, so it definitely was federal. And that's the law we rely on.
Okay, that's why I was just curious how, but which was it just here, was it elsewhere? And then, how many ICE agents are there around and where do they come from?
Where they live, but can we?
Up here.
Up here.
So yeah, no, I don't have any numbers here. I think the main thing, one presence that we see here almost more often than ICE is CBP, right? Because Michigan happens, have the honor of being a border state, and there are there's greater authority for immigration agents to conduct stops in some circumstances, just by virtue of the fact that basically all of our states is within 100 miles of an international boundary, and that includes the Great Lakes, right? So even though, so anywhere in Michigan, you can, is covered by this. So not only do we have to deal with ICE enforcement, we also have the border patrol agents. I am not aware of any enforcement actions that have happened here since January 20th. I think that most of the focus of this administration has been on making splashy arrests in bigger cities. I do expect that eventually it's going to have a trickle-down effect. I wouldn't be surprised if this summer we start to see some presence. But I do think that there is a fairly robust, grassroots communication network up here that, if someone sees, the dreaded green van that they can, that the word gets around pretty quickly, and hopefully some of those folks who are going to be doing, first response, witnessing and recording what's happening, hopefully the word will get around so that we can at least have that kind of support.
So I'm just going to throw one more question in. It's really for Bea and Deb. How are the families? You're doing a lot to mitigate some of the fear and prepare families, but what is their feeling right now?
So we've asked them but like they said, we want to stay somewhere where we call home. If we go somewhere else, it's still going to happen somewhere else. So they'd rather stay here where they have support, the kids have their friends and their routines. They are living in fear. A lot of them, they're sending their oldest kids to go buy groceries. So parents really are just staying home. So a lot of the older kids are having to step up to deal with what the parents are doing. But I mean, the fear is there, but they don't want to leave. They want to continue working here and continue as, they're not going to be stopped.
And finally, to all of you, what can the league, our local leagues, do to assist, in terms of advocacy or in other actions that we might take?
I think continue having, gatherings like this to educate people, get the word out, and let other people invite people to come to these kinds of things because it's important for everybody to hear the same message. And, when you see something, to say something, and especially like report, because that will always help. But I think, the more people we can get involved and talk about it, hopefully we can start making things. Say how somebody connect with an organizational chart. Because, for example, for children, even those who don't currently have DACA, deferred action for DACA levels, they're currently not accruing a lawful presence until they turn 18. Once they turn 18, they start being having unlawful presence in the United States, which will cause problems for them if they leave and try to come back. But there's things that they can do before they turn 18 or to get on the legal path of being, living in the United States. So it's especially important for underage kids to consult with an attorney. And similarly for parents, there are things that can be done. For example, a lot of people don't know about something called a provisional waiver, which is permission basically to return to the United States when they entered here illegally, and instead of having to wait for that permission abroad, which can take years, they ask for that permission here in the United States so that they don't leave without knowing where they have it. So there's lots of things that at least they can explore and talk about. I think a lot of undocumented people don't know what the law is, and then they have an avenue for a legal path, we just don't know it. So the best thing we can do for somebody that is undocumented is if they don't have the money to consult with an attorney, help them. or not-for-profit organizations. But they're limited to if a not-for-profit is unable to see in property, you have the funds to do a consultation with an experienced immigration attorney.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, specifically for the kids. It's not unusual that our office will get a phone call from someone who, maybe would have qualified as a special juvenile, and then you ask them, how old are you? I'm 18. It's like, ooh, I wish you had called us when you were 15 or 16, and then we could have done something. But there are some immigration benefits that actually are no longer available once you turn a certain age. So especially for minors, it's tough. And again, they might not be thinking about, their legal status when they are still a minor. They get more worried about it once they're finishing high school. They have to enter the workforce, and then by then it might be too late. So that's a big call. And then the only other things I was going to say, that the league can help with, get know your rights presentations. having a grassroots first response team and then calling your representatives. I mean, that's what we have right now. Or go to law school and
Well, thank you so much, all of you taking time out of your day, and we've all learned a lot. And I'm going to turn it over to Christina to close.
On behalf of the Leelanau County League and the Grand Traverse Area League, we want to thank all of you for being here. You've really helped us educate, and we're going to ask you for some more specific advocacy actions we can take. We are bound by our local areas. That's the different levels of leagues. So think of things in that respect, and our advocacy committees in each league will be meeting again and making recommendations to our board. And then we will make further recommendations to our members to carry out the actions. Now, before we finally close, we're going to invite you all to stay here for our 105th celebration. Diana Wynn is the president of the National League, and this is about a minute long, and then we'll close it up. So go ahead, Karen.
Hello, League members, and happy anniversary. 105 years ago, our suffragist founders established our powerful grassroots organization. Over a century later, we build on their legacy of demanding progress, equal rights, and voting access for all. We must never forget the power of our activist roots and the lessons we've learned since our founding in 1920. Today, we commit to building a league as diverse as the electorate we serve. We commit to standing up for the rights of every American voter, and we commit to passionate, resolute, and collective action in pursuit of a more perfect democracy. Thank you, and happy birthday to the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our members who provided lunch today, Ingrid Brophy and Laura Otwell, and to the Leelanau League for providing desserts and beverages, and Leelanau invites you to take cookies home. And thank you to Karen Baker, Brian Allrand, Steve Shugarts, who is our host today for Networks, for guiding us through the technical aspects to include members unable to be here in person, and Alice Schumann helped as well. This event was recorded and it will be shared with both leagues to publicize as they determine. We remind all of you to contact Congress and use and encourage them to vote no on the SAVE Act. That will be brought to the floor, I believe, on Monday. So get out there, call them, leave messages, email, and even if your representative just gives you a blank stare, it doesn't matter, keep doing it. Remember this, the league is needed now more than ever. So thank you all and good afternoon. Take some cookies. Thank you.